I see my friends. They're in trouble. I gotta save them.
Wait, Luke, that's a stupid idea. You're not done with all your Force stuff. And besides, you can't fight Vader. Only an experienced Jedi could fight Vader.
Well, why don't you go?
Yeah, you're probably ready to fight Vader.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 4 of the Pseudo Nerd Podcast for January 29th, 2016. I am your podcast host, Josh Kiser, and joining me in quote-unquote studio today, Josh Haddix.
I don't know if there's a quote-unquote. We're not in a studio, so...
and everybody. Kyle Hoagland.
And you can't just say hi ever.
He has to open with a giggle.
I wasn't laughing this time.
You did, though. No, at the beginning, you were...
Yeah. Well, I was laughing
because... There was a laugh.
I was laughing because Kiser said, quote-unquote, in studio. That was what I was laughing at. I wasn't laughing at the... Normally, I'm laughing at Hougie telling us, here we go, and we wait 10 seconds to actually start recording, which did not happen this week.
Being on the other side of that, and now how we're doing the recording now, and basically, Kiser hears the music... We don't. So now we're just sitting here for like a good 25 to 30 seconds of just waiting for Kiser to say something.
Welcome to our life. Speaking of music, I just want to do a quick shout out. You guys as listeners, the hardcore fans who have listened to the 3 episodes before this, know that there's a new theme, and that was written by a friend of ours, Brady Kruger. So you guys should go to SoundCloud/Brady Kruger and go check out his stuff. We really appreciate it, and you should go support him.
Shout out to Brett. What's his? Do we have a Twitter handle for Brett? Let's get him some Twitter followers.
I'm gonna guess it's at Brady Kruger. Speaking of Twitter followers, how about you give us some Twitter followers? I think we have 9 followers, maybe something like that. So at Pseudo Nerd Pod, people can maybe give us some love there. On top of that, we're on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and SoundCloud and God, wherever.
For all you old schoolers, we're on MySpace as well, in case you want to jump on there. That's not true, though. We're not on MySpace. So
don't go looking for
Zanga.com.
Kiser does have a blog on Zanga.com. If you find it, you'll be thoroughly amused.
It is quite entertaining, I gotta say.
It was.
Almost as entertaining as the 4th episode of the Star Wars podcast that we're going to do today.
Not impressed. Not impressed by that one.
Well, we're not. To be fair, this isn't. We don't have an exact layout for this show. This is our 4th show in this topic, and what we're going to do is we're each going to have our own list, a top 3 list that we're doing. In its own, everyone's picking a different 3 items they want to talk about. So we're not talking about a particular movie or a particular trilogy. We're just talking about the Star Wars as a whole.
Saga.
Yeah. And there's not really, I couldn't say as entertaining as, The Force Awakens or anything like that, because we're really talking about everything. So I just kept it the general 4th episode.
General 4th episode.
So, like I said, this month we did a all Star Wars month, and originally our plan was to do that, have a month, every month be a topic. And as we got to talking, we decided that maybe we're going to do this every other month with a big topic, and then the off months have sort of like grab bag of topics, so we can get a kind of a variety of things in. So you guys aren't. If, for instance, you guys are listeners and you don't care about Star Wars and you've put up with 3 and now 4 episodes of that, first of all, thank you for listening. And secondly, we'll try to mix it up a little bit and then go into something else. So if you ever get one of those months where it's like, oh, God, this is a topic I don't give 2 shits about, well, hopefully we can try to entertain you on these off months with some other random stuff, but all following under the Pseudo Nerd umbrella.
And hopefully it's not going to be too random where the things that we're going to talk about on the grab bag months will be maybe things that are a little bit more current or things that are coming out maybe that month, or things that are going to be a little bit more relevant for the month as well.
That's a great point too. Yeah, we'll try to keep things as relevant as possible. But let's go right into it. This month, or this topic, I should say, is going to be our list. And what we did is the three of us all came up with our own top 3 lists. And each of them are going to be completely different. And then we're going to discuss them. That person's going to pretty much explain, why they chose those particular things. And they're not necessarily going to be in order. We can, while you guys are giving your list, feel free to say, hey, this is the one I think is the most or the least or whatever your list might be. But it's not necessarily going to be in order. They're more just bullet points, if you will. And we're going to open things up with Haddix. So, Haddix, why don't you take it away?
So, as you two know, but our listeners do not, my list is going to be the top 3 moments. And to clarify it a little bit, they're not necessarily, the most... what's the word I'm looking for? The most action-packed moments or the most emotional moments or anything like that. I wanted to pick some moments that were very important to the movie or had something to offer us as fans. And you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. Before diving into number 1, I also decided to, instead of choosing 3 moments that might come from one trilogy, possibly the same movie, I decided to split it up and do a moment from each trilogy. Obviously, the third one only being from Force Awakens, because we haven't gotten the other 2 movies yet. And you'll kind of see where I went. I kind of try to tie them in together, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about here. To follow the flow of our podcast and how the movies were released, I'm going to start with the original trilogy. Again, in no order. I don't necessarily think this is the best one, but I'm going to follow how these movies were released. So I will start with the original trilogy. So you guys ready for this or what?
Let's hear this. And like you said, this list, even these 3 moments you're giving, aren't necessarily going to be the best moments or the coolest moments or the saddest moments or anything like that. So, yeah, let's hear what you got.
Yeah. All right. So my first moment, again, not in any particular order, but the first one I'm going to talk about is... Sorry, I got a sidetrack. The first one I'm going to talk about is probably arguably the biggest moment in the entire franchise to this point. And that is the whole I am your father moment. As we talked about in the first podcast, it is what basically made the original trilogy, episode 4, 5, and 6, and set up the possibility or the plan to create episodes 1, 2, and 3. The importance of this role or this moment was huge. Other than that, it kind of set up this new relationship between Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. To this point, Luke Skywalker had basically been training to defeat Darth Vader. That was kind of his purpose. He was supposed to bring balance back to the Force, defeat Darth Vader, who was the biggest, bad guy in the galaxy at that point. And finding out he was his father kind of added this whole twist to it, kind of made things a little bit difficult. And I feel like when that came out, it was so shocking to people that they actually added in Jedi the scene where Yoda kind of confirms that it was in fact true and it wasn't just some lie that...
Yeah, it's Vader funny you say that, because I was actually just going to add that point that, yeah, they did that scene with Yoda specifically because people thought, oh, maybe Vader's just screwing around with Luke.
Yes, and messing with his head, yeah. Yeah, I mean, so it was, that was a huge moment. It was basically a turning point in the whole saga to this point. And you could almost say the story of Luke Skywalker and Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader, all started right there. That kind of gave us all right, well, let's find out what happened, what made Darth Vader become Darth Vader, and then what eventually made Darth Vader kind of turn back to the light side a little bit and redeem himself. And now we're into the newest trilogy where we're kind of seeing Darth Vader's effects on, a new generation. So it kind of was like I said, arguably the biggest moment in the entire Star Wars franchise.
Yeah, I can't disagree at all with that. I mean, to the credit Lucas said when he realized Darth Vader was going to be Anakin Skywalker and Luke's father, he said, "Oh, now I'm in the middle of this 9-piece saga." So if they don't make that happen, we probably get those 3 movies, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, it was big, and I mean, I think I read a quote yesterday. I can't remember who it was, but someone said basically there will always be Star Wars movies, always be Marvel movies as long as they're making money, and that doesn't seem to be a problem right now. So I think we can credit that a little bit to that moment, to that storyline.
Yeah, I mean it was at the time probably one of the biggest plot twists in cinema, and I actually saw something the other day that this guy posted on the internet that his buddy had somehow managed to get through. He was like 26 or 27 years of life without ever knowing that Anakin's Darth Vader was Luke's father. And then he's like, they were showing a text conversation, and then later he's like, "Oh my God, Leia's his sister!" Like, those just seem like they're so pop culture at this point. Like, how do you not know that?
Yeah, that is kind of amazing to think about. It's like people that don't watch Game of Thrones now. You always hear shit about it. I mean, and I know social media is a little obviously more involved than back then, but even if you don't like the show, you still get all the details about it.
Absolutely. So I guess if Hougie has nothing to add to this, we can go to your next moment.
Hoagland, you ready to move on?
Oh yeah, I was only really going to add if I felt I disagreed with your choice, but I think you guys covered everything. Right.
Well, moving to again the second moment in no particular order. I'm going to move to the prequels, and like we talked about in episode 2, it's hard to find moments in the prequels that were really, really great. Some moments weren't bad, but I think as a whole we were kind of let down by the prequels. So I'll try to kind of keep this one quick. I'm sure there could be plenty of arguments to this or plenty of other moments that maybe might be better, but I think one of the cooler moments, one of the kind of more important moments, and maybe this is more to the fans, is the whole the Duel of Fates. It was one of the first full out lightsaber battles that we see in the prequels, coming off of the original trilogy.
In many ways, it was probably one of the most action intense lightsaber battles that we had seen up to this point.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know at one point Qui-Gon and them are running to the ship, and Darth Maul catches up, and like him and Qui-Gon kind of like real quickly. It's not the first time we see like lightsaber battle in the first one, but it's the first time we see like a kind of a full-fledged battle that takes the amount of time that it does. You know what I mean? And I think to Lucas's credit, this is kind of back before the Galactic Civil War, so it kind of shows, as you see in all of the prequels, there's a bunch of Jedi, and it kind of is showing everyone kind of in their prime. And this fight shows it. They're jumping around like it's 2 against 1. Darth Maul pulls out the double-edged lightsaber or whatever it's called, dual-bladed lightsaber, whatever.
Right. So and actually, just to highlight your point there, I think that's a great point. Is in the original trilogy, Darth Vader is really the only trained lightsaber user until Luke comes around, and then Luke gets a little bit, well, I guess Obi-Wan, but Obi-Wan's old.
Yeah.
And then, but so there's really not, you're not seeing these trained Jedi, wielding lightsabers. And then to your point, in the prequels, it is the era where there's tons of Jedi around who have been trained basically since children, so they're much more prone and skilled with sabers and using the Force and fighting like Jedi should be trained to fight.
Yeah, exactly. And to try not to spend a lot of time on this, the other great part of it is the music. It was arguably one of the best pieces of film score that's ever been written. It was fantastic. Everyone loves it. You know what I mean? That just kind of adds to the whole scene itself.
It's one of those you can like go pump that in your headphones when you're at the gym.
Oh god,
get all jacked up.
Yeah, I mean it's
Hougie, you know what I'm talking about.
That just adds to it. Hougie knows exactly what we're talking about.
Jesus Christ, guys.
So, I mean, unless you guys have anything to add, I won't spend too much time on the prequels.
I'll only say that as good as that was, I definitely liked that, Darth Maul versus Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. I still think the best moment of all three of them, just because I felt like it's finally turning that page of like, the grim foreshadowing of what the actual, the original 4, 5, and 6 was the execution of Order 66 in the third, in Revenge of the Sith. Just that the scene of, watching, Yoda basically like near collapse a bunch of times because he's just feeling all the Jedi being killed, and then it culminates with Anakin murdering all of the younglings.
Yeah, that was awesome.
that was one of those like for a trilogy that really lacked a lot of good acting or drama. That was probably the one that probably tugged at your heartstrings more than probably anything else in the trilogy.
It's sad that some of the best acting was a CGI Yoda. That's always a good thing.
And to
killing kids.
To your point to the killing kids, though, kudos to Lucas for actually taking it to that level. They could have avoided that altogether, and people were like, "Oh, what happened to the younglings? Oh, they just could have mentioned like everybody was slaughtered in the Jedi Temple."
Yeah.
But even having that scene, I think, was very powerful to get across just how dark Anakin he was just in such a dark place at that point. And the fact that he's going to go slaughter children is pretty intense.
Yeah, that is.
But just to follow up with your point, though, Haddix, I'm curious. So I guess my question is, what made you choose that particular scene? Like, what really stood out for you that, like, that was your most memorable moment, I guess, from that?
I think it was, again, just the action part of it, and maybe it was because it was the first movie that we had seen since the originals. It kind of stood out, the music. I mean, it also, when you sit down and think about it, it basically set up everything. I mean, that Qui-Gon was a badass who died, and he kind of, he wanted Obi-Wan to train Anakin. Like, Obi-Wan kind of was against it in the beginning, and he wanted him to train Anakin, so that led to him training Anakin, which obviously we know where all that leads from there.
The Jedi School of Training.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it was, and you could have written it in many different ways. I'm not saying that this was the only way to write it, but I mean, it started it all off. You know what I mean? Had Qui-Gon not died, things could have been very different. You know what I mean? But he died. Darth Maul died, which was cool. Well, he technically didn't die. We thought he did, but I just think it was a very important moment that led to the rest of what we knew had happened and what was going to happen in episode 2 and 3. That mixed with just the cool battle and the great music just kind of was a good moment altogether.
Okay, yeah, no, I just wanted to kind of further understand it, I think, just to see why you chose that particular spot. So no, that makes good sense. So feel free to continue on now.
All right. Jumping to the third moment, and I mentioned this last week in the podcast. One of my favorite moments, and I think everyone can agree that it is a huge moment, was the death of Han Solo. And while I was researching this, I don't think I really realized.
And by the way, if you guys skipped over The Force Awakens and came to this podcast, sorry we spoiled Force Awakens again.
Crap. Spoiler alert. So we'll have to mention that in the description for the podcast. But anyway, so the death of Han Solo. And I don't know if I realized this the 2 times I've seen it, but they kind of almost hinted at this the whole movie. And just a couple points to prove it. when Han and them are leaving to go to the Star Killer, Leia and him kind of have a little chit chat, and she mentions this being like the last goodbye. And at the time, you might not necessarily think it meaning like the last time we'll ever see each other type of deal, but she kind of makes that comment, and it's like a very emotional. She's like, go get our son or whatever. I can't remember exactly what she says, but
right, yeah, go get our son. And she also says something along the lines of, "I always hated seeing you leave, and that's why that's why I did it, so you'd miss me."
So you'd miss me. Yeah, it was just kind of a moment that you kind of made you think like, oh wow, this is real serious. You know what I mean?
I do think, before you go further, I have a quick. I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I wish that part he had looked at her and said, "I love you," and she looked at him and said, "I know."
Oh yeah, little
to
tease
throw back to that.
the,
Yeah, I don't know how you guys feel about that, but I thought that would have been a cool little thing.
I think that would have been
there.
cool. Yeah. I think that would have been maybe they were trying not to hint at the fact that he might die as much, so they didn't want it to be too emotional. But I think that would have been cool. I think that would have been a cool little nod or whatever. But anyway, another thing, which again I didn't really notice, and maybe this is looking too far into it, but there's a moment where Han hands Rey his blaster and says something like, "You're going to need it more than me," or something like that, which kind of might be a little bit of a head nod to, I'm not going to be around to use it. Again, not something you think of in the moment when it's happening.
So I want to disagree right there. And the only reason I say that is because that was the one moment in my mind. I went into this movie thinking Han was going to die, just based off of the previous and this and that.
Yeah.
But that scene, and then when he asks Rey right there, like, "Oh, Chewie and I would like to, we could use you on the ship, extra hand, this and that." So, like, I don't think he thought he was going anywhere at that point per se. And that's why he was like, "Oh yeah, you should ride with us. I kind of like you, Chewie. Chewie seems to like you, that sort of thing." So I don't know if necessarily at that point he gave her the gun, thinking like, "Well, I'm not going to make it."
I don't know if he necessarily. I think it's more of like a film thing, like kind of giving us hints that, because I think he just makes I think he makes the comment, and again, don't quote me on this. I don't know exactly what it is, but something like, "You'll need it more than me," meaning I can kind of handle myself a little bit better, kind of in the gist of the conversation.
Right, but you're saying there's like foreshadowing.
But it's almost like a foreshadowing thing. And the same with when him and Chewie are setting those bombs, and he has Chewie go a separate way, and then he hands him the trigger. He's like, "Hey, take the trigger." Again, kind of a little, why didn't he just hold on to the trigger if he was planning on? Again,
I found that part strange too, that he gave him the trigger. I mean, obviously you know why it happens, but like.
Yes, afterward. And again, I don't think he gave him the trigger. I don't think he gave him the trigger thinking like, "Well, I'm going to die, so take the trigger." It's just, again, a little bit of a film thing. Like, oh, well, why is he giving it to, just like you said? I think that's a little weird that he's giving him that, So
he hadn't seen Kylo yet at that point, right? When they're planting those.
No, he wasn't. No, he hadn't come out yet. He hadn't walked out yet.
Okay, yeah.
Because then that's kind of the fourth little thing is, Kylo's on the middle of this bridge, and then here walks out Han, which is kind of a thing back to Vader and Luke being on that. It's not as big of a bridge type of thing, but they're fighting when he chops off his hand
on that catwalk.
Yeah, on that catwalk. So it's kind of again, father-son situation on a bridge, as Kiser pointed out in the last podcast. No guardrail. So I think the setup was good. They set this whole thing up, and it was a very powerful scene. If anything, for two reasons. They had in a very, I don't want to say short film, because it was like, 2.5 hours or something like that, but 2 hours.
Basically the same length as all their other movies.
Yeah. In a very short period of time, they had, and whether you think Han is Rey's father or not is beside the point, but in a very quick time, Han kind of became like a father figure to Rey. She liked being on the ship with him. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, they even make the comment when Kylo is trying to read her mind. He said,
"The father you never had." Yeah,
yep.
Yeah. So him dying, they made it so that him dying was very traumatic for her. You know what I mean? Even though they just met, in the span of this movie. So that kind of will always affect her going forward. She saw him die. She was there. She witnessed it. It's going to impact her greatly. And it kind of, I don't know if completed is the right word, but it pushed Kylo down that dark path, basically of no return. You would assume he killed his father. That was kind of what he needed to do to kind of break free of any goodness that was in him. Now we'll see if that's actually true or not going forward, but that's kind of where they leave you.
Right. And
after he kills him.
Did you I'm interested in both of your guys' opinions on this. They're standing on that catwalk, and the star killer is absorbing the star from outside, and he's sitting there talking about how he's battling this, basically this light and dark inside of him, and it looks like you think he's just about to turn to the light side with Han there saying, come with me, I'm your father, whatever, and then the last little bit of the star is absorbed, and the whole thing turns dark.
Yeah,
and at that moment, he kind of, in some ways, it's a big slap in the face to the audience. Like, hey, pay attention. Like, everything went dark. Like, okay, you don't have to be that obvious about it. But did you guys like that it went that way? Do you think that was a nice cinematic move with the tone, or was it just too obvious of a thing?
Well, it was obvious enough for my wife, because the moment that that happened, where the shadow kind of like overtook like that part of the reactor where they were, my wife like leans over to me. She goes, "Han's gonna die, isn't he?" and then like literally like 3 seconds later is when he activates his that the side of the saber through his chest.
I think whether you liked it or not, I think we all as fans knew when he walked out on that catwalk that it wasn't gonna just be a happy.
Yeah, there's no coming back.
He wasn't walking off that catwalk like with his son back. You know what I mean? Like that wasn't.
Yeah, they weren't gonna be like arm in arm. Like this was go save the planet.
That leads me into this little quote. I want to read this. When I was researching this is on MTV.com. A gentleman by the name of Alex Zalbin, I think that's how you pronounce his name.
Is he a writer for MTV?
Yes, he's a writer for MTV.
It wasn't just like, this isn't like MTV commenter, Alex. No,
he wrote this whole article on basically answering the question, should they have killed Han? And this was kind of his ending to it. And I want to read this to you because he put it really well. I didn't even want to try to paraphrase it and try to take credit for it or anything. So here's what he said. Alex Zalbin, MTV.com. So should Han have died? The answer is yes. Probably long ago. Probably at the end of Jedi. But he didn't. And so here we get the conclusion to Han Solo's story. The end of a smuggler, a rogue, an old man still playing a young man's game. Still getting sucked back into saving the galaxy one last time, caring too much and having too big of a heart to let other people get hurt on his account. So in that way, beyond finally being done with all of it, Ford got his wish. He sacrificed himself just as nobly as Obi-Wan to give the next generation a chance. And I thought that was a very good way to summarize why that needed to happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that would have looked good on his like tombstone if his body didn't fall off a catwalk that had no guardrails.
Well, as we know, just because your body falls down a reactor doesn't necessarily mean that it's gone. So,
well, the planet did blow up, so
that's true. That is a good point. So, but anyway, those are
he'll somehow be a Force ghost at the end of episode 9.
Those are my my 3 moments, if you will.
Well, nice. I think those were some good moments, definitely. And that last one, I think, kind of sets the tone for the next trilogy. So I think you could, even after watching episodes 8 and 9, there's a good chance that might still be the moment you would pick. It'll be the death of Luke Skywalker's hand all over again, right? Oh, God, I cracked myself up.
This guy laughing by himself.
Well, Hougie, we're going to, much like we're scratching our heads on Haddix's comment there, we're going to go right into your list, which are the top 3 head scratchers.
All right, better. That's good.
Okay.
No,
I'm working on it.
All right, it's of the 4 you've done, that's one of the top 4. So
one of these days, maybe we'll just do a full list of my best segues.
Yeah, we're gonna do like an audio, like that'll be like at the beginning. It'll be like a little cut of all of your stupid segues.
It might be easier to do a list of your worst segues. That might be better than best.
It'll just be called List of Segues. So my top list, I have here the top 3 plot holes / head scratchers, because when you do a saga like Star Wars and you kind of like Tarantino it, where you start in the middle and then you go to the beginning and then you go to the end, it can be kind of difficult to make sure that every idea that ends up becoming what is now on the that's actually going to be in the movie is going to fit perfectly. It's very very hard to do, and this Star Wars is not immune to this at all. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the Death Star. So, and by the Death Star I mean all 3 of them, because there were 3 Death Stars.
I believe there was 2 Death Stars and a Star Killer.
So it's a big Death Star. So the first problem I had with the Death Star, and don't get me wrong, it's the idea makes sense. It is kind of annoying to have the same idea 3 times. But I understand the whole create a presence, a fearful presence that you can just push a button and mass genocide billions of people. But the problem I had with it was I don't understand the economy of Star Wars. I won't attempt to. I don't know what, according to U.S. dollars, is credits for them. But I've read a ton of articles, and a lot of people smarter than me who have plenty of, many more degrees at much, bigger accredited colleges than I've ever been to, have actually taken the time to try and monetize, give a value to the Death Star. And so even just the original Death Star, the completed Death Star in A New Hope, this person says that, and this is from Gizmodo.com, first says that, assuming that even just a 10th of the Death Star actually is made out of something and the rest of it is just empty space.
Which would be a terrible use of space, but still.
Sure. Well, I mean, when you're in space, you got plenty of it, so might as well. So yeah, this guy says, so you assume that 1/10 of the 17.16 quadrillion cubic meters that is the Death Star is something other than empty space. And then the other, like 6/10 of it is total volume is just pressurized space. So that's about 1.7 quadrillion cubic meters that's just steel or some sort of whatever material, which is about, according to the weight of steel, is 134 quadrillion tons. So to make this short, though, is that it costs about $13 quintillion for just the alloys and the steel and the elements. That's just for the parts. Then you got to talk about shipping all that out to space, which they said is about $95 million per ton. So that adds $12.8 septillion in transport. For people who are not Asian, septillion is, you have million, billion, trillion, quadrillion, quintillion, sextillion, septillion. So that's like something like 15 or 8, it's like 18 zeros or 15 zeros after the 15. That is 1.4 trillion times the current U.S. debt. So, and the fact that they made another one after this. And then the fact that they made a planet that's all the Star Killer base, which is bigger than the Death Star.
I feel like maybe the planet may be a cheaper one, though, because it's built into the core of the planet. So, it's not cheap in the actual, like, if they figured it out, but I could imagine it being cheaper because you wouldn't building the entire structure out of it. It's almost, you're building it into the planet. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but then, like I said, then you add on the fact this is also not even counting the people who are working there. I'm sure that they have, I don't know how they do salaries, but let's put it this way. Short of it is,
they have good benefits in a dental plan, I believe, right?
Dental plan. They have. It's just it blows my mind how expensive making one Death Star is, let alone then being able to create another one a couple years later, then 30 years later, just completely weaponizing an entire planet that I think they said was about 4 times the size of the Death Star. So
at least, yeah.
Yeah. So just from the idea of resources, money, labor, everything, I cannot wrap my head around. It takes 30 years sometimes to build bridges in this country, let alone.
Well, to be fair, there's no OSHA in Star Wars. We've already declared this, so I feel like they had far less regulations that they had to go through and red tape, so they could probably build it a lot quicker.
OSHA more than Porkins. In this podcast.
And there's our Porkins quota for the day.
This is true.
I guess all I can say is, I don't even know. Maybe this is answered somewhere, other than maybe the fact that it's all made up. But maybe there's like a planet of steel that's laying around somewhere, so it's like really cheap to buy steel. That's all I can.
Or maybe they took the planet of steel and carved a Death Star out of it.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, whatever it is. So then let's just then assume that we can make this Death Star. All right, it's the size of a moon, though it is no moon. And the other thing I thought about is, how the hell does this thing actually move? How does this thing propel itself? Unless you show up to the Death Star, I know that they have reached Alderaan. They had to somehow get there, but it's never been explained how logistically you move something that gigantic with just regular thrusters.
You just gotta use the Force, dude.
Yeah, so you're saying Vader was just moving that with his mind the whole time?
Yeah, what else is he gonna do on that long trip?
I suppose that's what he was doing in his little egg. He was steering the Death Star.
So let me throw this out there. Tell me how nerdy this is. If you accept the gaming books, the Death Star Technical Companion, listed as having both ion drives and a series of 1, 2, 3 hyperdrive field generators. Then there's a picture that shows how this thing works.
Is it from that book where they cut the thing like in half and show you like all the levels of it?
I'm not sure. This is on a website. It's from this book. And again, I don't know if it's the book was ever approved by Lucas or anything like that. It could have just been some crazy fan that made all this shit up. But yeah, I mean, this goes into some ridiculously nerdy shit.
So then the only other thing that I have a complaint on before I move on to the next thing is, so the Star Killer base, it's a planet. It's a weaponized planet, and we all know that from episodes 1 and 3, when the 2 Death Stars get blown up, the third one, or in episode 3, it took a fleet of, in the end, it took two planes or 2 fighters, the Millennium Force and Wedge, I believe it was.
Did you just say the Millennium Force?
Did I say Millennium? I miss Cleveland. For those who don't know, Millennium Force is a roller coaster at Cedar Point, Sandusky, Ohio. America's rock and roller coaster.
Not to be confused with the Millennium Falcon, which is in fact the air
or perhaps the Millennium Falcon, if you will.
The Falcon. So you got the Millennium Falcon, and then Wedge's, his ship. So those two together were able to get into the reactor and destroy the 3rd Death Star. The first Death Star was destroyed basically by one guy, accompanied by a couple dudes and also Porkins. And then you go to the Star Killer base, which once again, this is an entire planet that's being attacked by a handful of fighters, and yet they find a way to blow up an entire planet. So now that's either just short-sightedness on the Empire to be able to say that they were able to create a weapon that is easily destroyed by a handful of blasts from a ship. And also, obviously, planting some bombs at the base in order to let them get that shot in. But it just drives me nuts that such small amount of firepower is able to blow up a planet.
Well, I think that of the 3 might be the most realistic one to me. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, because it's built in the core, so they're going to make the core by blowing up that section of it, it's going to cause the core to go uneven. Well, it takes a couple rounds of bomb droppings from the X-Wings or whatever they are, as well as them blowing up a huge chunk of it with those detonators inside. On top of that, the First Order were not expecting them to get even into the planet's through the planet's defenses or anything, because there was supposed to be something where you can only get through if you fly in. Like, you can't get because of the, like, speed or something like that. They ended up remember they had to fly light speed to get in there until the Captain Phasma shut the defenses down. So, I mean, there's a little bit more there, so I can feel like they're less at fault. But the original Death Star, above and beyond all the others, is the one to me that's the biggest head scratcher. Because, like you said, they invested a shit ton of money into the creation of it, only to have the biggest loophole in the world cause its complete destruction.
The size of a womp rat, you know. So I'm good with the Death Star, and I want to be quick with this. I know that I don't want to take forever here. So the next one I was going to talk about, I was teetering between either this topic or Ghost Anakin, and I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about when I say Ghost Anakin. The fact that I don't understand how he knows how to become a Force spirit, considering that he never learned how to. But I digress. That's not what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about...
It could be argued that when Qui-Gon died, that... because Obi-Wan sort of was learning it from Qui-Gon, or after Qui-Gon passed, that maybe you could assume that Obi-Wan trained Anakin with that ability as well back then.
Well, no. What happened? No, because at the end of 3... Yoda tells Obi-Wan that he heard from Qui-Gon, and he found out then that Qui-Gon learned how to be immortal and be able to become that Force spirit.
Oh,
and he told Obi-Wan, "You have training." Yeah, he's like, "I've got training for you," and that's what basically Yoda and Obi-Wan went away to train to learn that ability. So Anakin never learned it. That's why I'm so confused. Like at the end of 3, when they redid him, obviously, because before it was the old actor who played Vader. Still don't know how. But anyways, I'm moving on. The one that I want to talk about was, so at the end of 3, Padme has the twins, Luke and Leia, and they decide that it's best to split them apart and hide them, including Yoda to go into exile and hiding, Obi-Wan to go into hiding, because obviously the Empire is going to come after them, because they're still going to be a threat as long as they know that they're still alive. Makes perfect sense. All on board on that. So what did they do? Did they change their names? Did they get a wig? Did they get a sex change? Did they do what they thought that was very necessary to hide the identities of these really important players to one day, to create the rebellion? So Luke and Obi-Wan go to Tatooine, the place where Anakin was born, the place where his mother is buried. That to me is the last place that you would want to be at to stay away from Darth Vader. Because if Darth Vader thought that he may have had any relatives, even remotely, that's where he would probably go. So there's Luke.
I looked this one up because I knew you were going to talk about this, and I was curious too, because I've always thought that was like the most bizarre thing in the world. So I wanted to hear like people's theories and stuff. And one point people said is Tatooine has had so many bad memories for Anakin, between that's where his mother was killed, he was a slave there, that kind of thing, that he just wants no part of returning there, which I could see. But the more telling point, and I read another theory, and I think this one makes a hell of a lot more sense. Anakin hates sand. He says it's coarse and it gets everywhere. So hide his son on a planet of sand, and he doesn't want to go anywhere near
that. And then you find out, like, and then in the new movies, if it seems like all of the people that are going to save us are going to bring balance to the Force are all from sandy planets. So now we go to Leia. So what do they do with her? So they entrust her to Senator Organa. So she gets a pretty sweet deal. Obviously, I don't think Organa goes into hiding. He's just doing his normal thing as a senator. So they know who he is. So I don't know how they hid Leia away from, the Emperor or anything. But so Leia then becomes one of the most prominent figures of the Republic. She actually becomes royalty. And her name is like... Oh, and also go back to Luke. there for a second. But Luke's last name is still Skywalker, which doesn't make it, which also is a clear giveaway. And then Leia is a princess. So how does Vader not, I guess, feel her presence and her, because she is sensitive with the Force, even though she might not use it, and maybe that's the reason why he never really noticed her.
Because she doesn't really seem to be aware of her Force abilities, as well as, and I think in many ways Anakin didn't think that Padme survived or even had kids. So in some ways you can argue that Anakin never went looking for kids because he never thought he had. Well, and when I say kids, a kid, like he thought he was only he didn't know he was having twins, for one. So I think he wasn't expecting to go out there looking. But I think I feel like the Emperor should have known that she had at least had a kid, or survived enough to give kids, unless he was completely oblivious to it as well. But maybe he just wanted to keep Anakin as far away from any offspring as possible, in fear that Anakin would raise his child to be, his next successor, and then kill Sidious off.
Yeah. So the last guy is our favorite, wily old Ben Kenobi, who is also on Tatooine. And at first it's okay because it makes it seem like he's wearing, garbs, like tattered. It almost looks like a druid. And at first it seems like, okay, he's at least he probably looks like he's a guy in hiding. But then you go back to the prequels, and that's what the fuck they wear. That's like a regular Jedi outfit.
Yep.
So it made sense until they said, you know what? I like the way Ben looked. Let's just make that the Jedi outfit for the prequels. So that never made sense to me. So all in all, it was pretty bad job of trying to keep yourselves concealed. I mean, they did a good job, I guess.
It apparently worked, but it should not have. Maybe it was one of those, it was so obvious that it was the last place he would ever think to look. Or it's just because he hates sand.
So the last thing then, as far as plot holes, this is the one that bugs me the most, is Yoda's training, or lack thereof. So Yoda, the greatest Jedi Master, arguably ever. Obi-Wan mentions in the beginning that he was trained by Yoda, and it was his master. But obviously that's kind of debunked when you go watch the prequels, and he's clearly Qui-Gon Jinn's Padawan. So unless he got the Yoda training, which we'll talk about later, of basically an afternoon, which is all Luke apparently needed, then I guess. But Obi-Wan was not trained by Yoda as far as anybody is concerned. So that never made sense to me. So then we have to go to Luke. So Luke trains with Yoda, and I don't know if the movie is supposed to make you think he trained for a long time, but because of how the scenes are shot with Han Solo and the gang being chased and hiding in the asteroid and going to Cloud City, that all seemed like that all took maybe a day's worth of them getting around and hiding. It didn't seem like they stayed very long in the asteroid. It seemed like that all that took roughly an afternoon worth of maneuvering around to get to where they needed to go.
Yeah, so I've read some things on that, and people, and I think part of it's them giving just the benefit of the doubt, but I've read anywhere speculation that they could have made that trip in a day, or could have taken 6 months. I would be inclined to maybe Yoda's training with Luke was maybe a week or two's period of time, but I think a lot of it they're just sort of trying to give the time frame of benefit of the doubt and say, oh, Luke got some pretty good training in there, even though it probably wasn't that much training.
And then compare that to Anakin Skywalker's training by Obi-Wan, which was roughly 12 to 13 years to get him to be where he was. And yet then there's Luke, who gets, what could be what seems like anyways, like a day or maybe a week's worth of training, goes and fights Vader. Then in the final episode, he decides that he's going to go continue his training, which means I don't know what the hell he was doing for a year, other than trying to figure out where Han Solo is, which, by the way, they should know because Jabba has him. He's on Tatooine. I don't know why it took them a year to find Solo. But then Luke goes back to Dagobah to get training, and he doesn't get training because Yoda tells him, "Oh, you're good," and then dies. So Luke saves the day. Luke overcomes and defeats Vader on what seems like the amount of time it would take for all of us to go through driving courses.
Yeah,
Thoughts?
No, I agree, and I'm gonna roll this right into my list here, which is the top 3 most overrated characters. And a quick side note, when I say overrated, people are going to say, oh, Boba Fett and things like that. I want to say overrated characters who are actually utilized in the Star Wars movies. So take out Boba Fett, take out Darth Maul.
Well, Boba Fett was utilized. He was fed to the Sarlacc. Sarlacc had a good lunch.
Very, very, very not utilized. But Yoda might be the most overrated for me. And it starts with just that alone. I mean, he sits there and first of all, Anakin Skywalker shows up at the Jedi Council's door, and they say, oh my god, this is the guy from the prophecy, but Qui-Gon, he's too old, we're not going to have him trained. And then a bit later, they're like, I guess we will have him trained, and we'll give him to Obi-Wan as his, just now that he's officially a Jedi master. And so it's like, okay, cool, which is their first mistake. Well, then on top of that, they realize one of the biggest reasons why they thought he was going to be a troubled student and was because he had this fear and sadness with his mother. Well, then you know what? You guys are the fucking Jedi Council. Why don't you go rescue his mother and bring her, to Coruscant? And then he could be like, okay, mom's safe. Like, I don't have to worry about her anymore. No, they leave her there and basically make him continue to feel resented the entire time. On top of that, Yoda's completely worthless. After all this shit goes down and Vader becomes, Anakin becomes Vader, he says, I'm going to go to Dagobah. This guy has been supposedly training Jedi for 600 years, 700 years, whatever it is at this point. And instead of going to try and stop him, he just runs into hiding and does nothing. To your point, Kyle, Luke shows up, says, I want training. They do some flips and he teaches them how to kind of lift this up and that. And then he says, you're not ready. You're going to succumb to the dark side. Luke doesn't do that, returns, and Yoda's like, well, all right. Yeah, well, Vader's your father. Peace. I'm out of here. Oh, by the way, Leia's your sister. And that's it. And for a guy who's supposed to be this great Jedi master, what did he really accomplish? He screwed up Anakin from the beginning, and then he doesn't do much to help Luke out at the end. Luke does most of that training on his own. And, he spends 30 years, instead of in those 30 years trying to, find other Jedi to train and, come up with a secret Jedi army. No, he fucking hides in a swamp.
That's the one thing about the prequels that I'm actually grateful that the prequels existed, because if it wasn't for them, I feel like even more Yoda would have just been an annoying Jar Jar Binks but a Muppet, because he really wasn't that impressive even in the regular movies, other than he can rise the X-wing and had some little bits of knowledge, but he was a pretty annoying character. And if it wasn't for that, to show how badass he kind of is, how powerful he truly is in the prequels, I agree with you even more that Yoda.
Right, yeah, they do show.
It seems like he doesn't help much.
No,
yeah.
he was.
And
he was
once
pretty
again,
worthless.
if he's that powerful, why not you just go and stop Vader?
Right, and instead he just goes and takes a nap for a long time. And then to get my second guy on the list, it's sort of a worthless character here, and it's his fellow friend Mace Windu, who's on the Jedi Council with him, who, again, some of the points I made with Yoda on how they treated Anakin, how they pushed him there, but then outside of that, why do people think Mace Windu's so cool? I think the first reason is because he's played by Samuel L. Jackson, and I was like, well, Samuel L. Jackson's a badass, so Mace Windu has to be a badass. And he's got the purple lightsaber, which at the time it's like, oh, something new. But
did anybody else even have the purple lightsaber at all?
I don't think so.
I was reading a couple weeks ago that basically came because he told Lucas he wanted to stand out in that huge Jedi fight, and it was a surprise to him. Like Lucas gave him a purple lightsaber. There's absolutely no reason for it. So
other than the fact he's like the only prominent African American, he felt he needed more reason to stand out.
Well, in the point to go to that big fight, one of the big things people say is he beat Jango Fett. He killed Jango Fett, and we talked about this before. Jango Fett and Obi-Wan have an epic fight at the beginning of Attack of the Clones. I mean, epic's probably a little bit of a stretch, but it's a very intense fight. If you watch his death scene when they're fighting in that Coliseum, Jango Fett gets attacked by that horned beast, which was one of the three that were trying to kill Padme, Anakin, and Obi-Wan. So he gets beat up by that for a minute, and then Mace Windu comes and starts standing there, and Jango starts shooting him with his blaster, just standing motionless, shooting. And then Mace Windu is just deflecting blaster 1, 2, 3, walks up and just chops his head off. Jango Fett, that was Boba Fett-esque sort of death scene because it was so worthless. After you saw how much of a badass he could have been, his death scene was much like his son's. It was very anticlimactic. So you could say, oh, Mace killed him, but really, it wasn't that intense. And then
I feel all he needed to do was just shoot his rocket, or not his rocket, his little jetpack, and get out of the way for a moment, just like he did with he used up so many cool moves when fighting Obi-Wan, and then it just seemed like he just had lead feet and just stood there.
Right, and I don't know, they could say that maybe when that beast attacked him, it knocked out his jetpack, but either way, he could have stepped to the left or anything. But again, so then the biggest thing Mace's screw up, I think, is when we talked about this before. He shows up with to arrest Sidious, brings 3 jabronis with him, who, by the way, are hands down the most worthless Jedis. So whoever trained them, whether it's Yoda or Mace Windu or somebody else, whoever that Jedi Master is that trained those guys, they should be fired immediately. Sidious just walks up, stabs the one, stabs the other, hits the other guy twice, and then kills him. You watch that death scene again, and it's embarrassing for the Jedis. So then he basically fights his way, and I think Sidious is playing with him the whole time. But then he finally says, I'm going to arrest, you're under arrest for everything you've done. Okay, great. Anakin comes in. He shoots Sidious shoots the lightning at Mace, and he's blocking it. And he then says, you know what? Instead of putting you under arrest, I'm going to kill you. Had he kept him and said under arrest, Anakin was pleading with him, let's just arrest him. He says, no, I'm going to try and kill him. That pisses Anakin off because Anakin's trying to save Padme and knows that apparently Sidious is the only one who could do that, and he kills him. If Mace just didn't change his mind, it could be a whole different story there. They could have put him in jail, and, Anakin and Mace are living happily ever after. But what bothers me more than even that little thing, because you can throw some holes in that, is my third character here, and that's Princess Leia. She pretty much does nothing for the first, really, in the 4 movies she's in. She's supposed to be this general, and maybe she's a good tactician, but she really doesn't do a whole lot on that end. She gets captured at the beginning. The best thing she does is she gives R2 the plans of the Death Star, but R2's the one who delivers it from there on out. He's the one who handles
she kills
that.
Jabba. That's kind of big.
So she does kill Jabba, but to be fair, Jabba's not really moving around or anything. He's just sitting there. So I'll give her credit for killing Jabba. She does nothing, I don't think, in Empire whatsoever. She runs around on Hoth, then goes to Cloud City, tells Han she loves him. The biggest thing she does is she finds Luke at the end, and that's because Luke calls to her. But you think this girl who's got this Force ability could do something, and she doesn't.
I thought the one thing that I thought was really funny is, so she's a princess. She's royalty. She's not somebody that you want to get endangered. But yet she's always, whenever there's all right, there's going to be a really dangerous mission, and she's like, I'll volunteer. And I was like, all right, cool. What? You're a princess. Why would you even want to, when they were creating the team to go to the Endor moon, why is Leia there? Why would Leia want to be there? She's not
to be
skilled.
fair, her planet was blown up at that point, which, by the way, she doesn't give two shits about. These people adopted you and raised you as royalty, and you watch them die, and you're like, well, oh well. But the biggest thing she did is in A New Hope, they have these plans, they sneak them out, R2 gets them, all this and that. She gets captured. They escape. They have these Death Star plans, and they escape, and the Empire couldn't get these plans from her. So what does she do? They leave, and she says, oh, that was too easy. That they must have let us go on purpose. That was too easy. They're tracking us. Okay, fine. Great thinking, Leia. That was very smart on your part, because they probably were. Let's go to the Rebel base. So then the Death Star knows exactly where to go to destroy the rebellion and be done with it. Like, why would you go to the one place that they're trying to find, the hidden base, when you know they're tracking you? You know, luckily it worked out, but she almost fucked everything up right there at the beginning.
Hell, she fucked up by having a kid, it seems like, too.
Not to mention she's a horrible actress, so just throwing that out there.
Well, there you have it.
You couldn't wait to say that.
He couldn't. But that's my list in a nutshell, and I want to keep things quick and concise and tell you why. And if you guys disagree or you agree with our moments or lists or anything like that, feel free to write out to us. Leave us comments on our Facebook page, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, any of those. You can, at
we'll have
Pseudo
4 more
Pod.
pie by next week.
Yeah. And next week, like I said, we're going to do a whole new topic. It's going to be a new month. We're no more Star Wars, so if you guys love the Star Wars, I'm sorry. Maybe we'll come back to it down the line. But for now, we're going to move into it's Super Bowl week. So we're gonna talk a little sports. We're gonna get out of the nerd culture for a bit and talk some nerdy sports stuff.
A little sports porn.
So for Josh Haddix, Kyle Hoagland, and myself, Josh Kiser, from Kelly's to Alcatraz Island, we will see you guys next week.
Have a nice Friday.
Happy Friday.